Game over, man. Game over. Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger potion. So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for November 18th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hello, thanks for joining us, everybody. I am very excited to dive into this one. I've always been a fan of Jesse Eisenberg and had heard really great things about A Real Pain. It premiered at Sundance earlier in the year.
Yeah.
And it was talked about as one of the very best films of Sundance this year. Everyone was raving about the duo that is Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin. So
Kieran and Jesse. It almost sounds like a musical duo or something like that. I'm off to go and see Kieran and Jesse.
Yeah, exactly. Before we get into it, though, can I ever so briefly, tell you about this heartbreaking interaction I had with Sam just before we started recording tonight?
No, but of course, go ahead.
Oldest, who turned 9 a month ago, wanted me to when he was real young, he always liked to play in the shower with me or wanted me to take baths with him and stuff.
Sure.
And then of course he grows up, he gets a little bit older, and every now and then he'll still ask me to do the same. And I told him, you're at an age now where you need to do these things on your own. And he looked at me dead in my face and said, well, then I don't want to grow up. And I melted.
I thought you were going to tie it into this in some way, and Sam was going to look at you and say, you know what, Dad, you're a real pain.
You know, it did bring me a real pain. At least it brought me real #JD tears. That's exactly what it did.
It gave you real
melted.
pain, whether it was or the real pain. It gave you some real pains.
It just, I told him, I was like, you don't want to. Be a kid forever. Absolutely. Be a kid forever. I still
think of ourselves as kids.
Yeah, it was one of those Citizen Kane moments is how I tend to look at it. It's just a reminder. This happens from time to time, and obviously Sam is completely unaware. He's never seen the film. Might not ever see the film. Who knows? But when he does things like this, all it does is remind me of that film and why it's my favorite movie of all time. Yes, be a kid.
Kids
100%.
Kids do indeed say the darnest things because they're the ones that are the most truth sayers in the entire world. They have no filter. They don't bullshit. It's a real pain. It's a real pain.
It is a real pain. Yeah. Speaking of truth sayers, let's go ahead and jump into A Real Pain. The latest film from Jesse Eisenberg, whom, we quite adore. His acting career has certainly been all over the place, but man, when he's at his best, he is certainly one of the more interesting. Working.
Let's not forget Sasquatch Sunset from earlier this year.
Yeah, that's right. He was in that.
So interesting is the right word.
Yeah, I still really like that film a lot. I don't know.
I did too.
That probably won't make its way into the In Session Film Awards at all. But it is one of those films from earlier in the year, because that also premiered at Sundance, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it did. It certainly came out around that time. So I think it did. I don't remember offhand, though.
I think that is the case. I'd have to double check myself and look it up. But I want to say that, oh, yes, I see it here. It premiered at the 2024 Sundance Film Festival.
There it is. Yep. Okay.
So my man Jesse Eisenberg was busy back in January of this year. So yeah, I mean, I'm always excited to see what he has up his sleeve next. And
apparently he and his other crew just finished wrapping Now You See Me 3, which apparently they are making.
Yeah. I did see that. I had heard that they were making that film
Yeah.
last year, I want to say. I do remember some sort of report that they were going to do a third film. And yeah, they just released some photos, I believe, some set photos, behind the scenes photos, whatever it was.
Not only did I forget it was happening, I forgot there was a second one.
Oh yeah, no, I do remember seeing the second one because my wife loves these movies.
Oh,
And
gosh,
she
really?
wanted to see the
That's cute.
second one, so that's how I ended up getting into that second Now You See Me. So, I'm sure we'll end up watching this third film, however bad it may or may not be.
We'll see if we end up reviewing it or not, but at the very least, I'll know you'll be seeing it.
Yeah, it's silly. That second film, they're both quite silly, but the second film is on another level of goofiness.
Is the second one that's the one that featured Daniel Radcliffe for the first time, right?
Yes. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Just because of him, I feel like that might be the one I like more.
Yeah. I mean, I think it just depends. It's interesting because the first film I do think is a cleaner movie. I don't know why we're getting into this, but the first
I
Now
brought
You
it
See
up. I
Me,
am so sorry.
it is more seamless. I think it is a better movie in terms of construction and rhythm and pacing and all that stuff. The second film, though, is way more aware of how silly it is. The first film takes itself, I think, a little too seriously for
That was my problem
a
with
movie
it.
that is
Yeah,
pretty goofy.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, I had fun with it. I think it's fine. But I do appreciate, even though it's a messier film, I do appreciate that about the sequel, that it's just self-aware.
I was just looking this up, and the sequel was
At any rate.
directed by one John M. Chu, who might become an Oscar-nominated director this year
Oh,
with
okay.
Wicked.
Well, there you go. Okay. Are you ready to get into this then? Is there any other preamble that we need to...
After that mini retrospective on the Now You See Me movies, let's go ahead and talk about A Real Pain.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and do that. All right. So, A Real Pain, written and directed by the one and only Jesse Eisenberg. It stars Eisenberg and the aforementioned Kieran Culkin, as well as Will Sharp, Jennifer Grey, and a few others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with A Real Pain, it is about mismatched cousins who reunite for a tour through Poland to honor their beloved grandmother. The adventure takes a turn when the odd couple's old tensions resurface against the backdrop of their family history. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this one. Brendan, what did you think about A Real Pain?
Not a reflection of the In Session Film podcast. So this show is not a real pain. JD, you are not a real pain. You're real good.
I appreciate
this movie's
that.
also real good. I'm sure that's what that was the pun you were probably going to use to open up your thoughts as well. So I apologize for stealing that from you.
Oh, good.
But the movie is real good. It's kind of rare that we see movies that depict family members like this that are really this heavily emphasizing the cousin relationship as opposed to something else. I think that's actually a very unique thing that this movie does, but it treats them very brother-like, and they even explain that in the movie why they're so close and why they ultimately felt like brothers, but they're connected by blood in a different way that we don't see all that often, which I thought was a really refreshing touch for a movie like this. We'll of course talk more about the film's deliberate parallels between the shared grief of its two main figures and the collective grief of their Jewish history. There's definitely a parallel that it's trying to draw there that I did think was ultimately very moving. I am really interested to see what Jesse Eisenberg has up his sleeve next, because I have not seen his debut film from, it was a few years ago,
2022, I believe.
Yeah, When You Finish Saving the World with Julianne Moore and Finn Wolfhard. I have not seen that. I heard mixed to positive things about it. It seems as though if that was the case, and that is maybe how I would have felt about it, this definitely must be some type of refinement on how he's growing as a filmmaker. Because I do think this is a very confident film. It's not the flashiest film of the year or anything like that, but there is a real confidence in the turmoil that's boiling underneath these two characters for a film that's also kind of funny at times, but also very boldly uncomfortable. Especially in Kieran Culkin's performance, it is not the most comfortable performance to watch all the time. It's a very volatile performance, and I know some people in my life who might be interested in this movie might actually have a hard time sitting through it. And that's a praise to his performance because it's meant to go for those things. And I'm sure we'll talk about his performance as well as Jesse Eisenberg's performance as well, which I also want to spend some time on. I do think the movie is very good. And I weirdly look forward to watching this one again. I think this one has a very good universality to it.
Yeah, I absolutely adored this film. It is indeed really, really good. I want to perhaps first talk about the screenplay here because I think it is
Sure.
incredibly sharp. This is one of the best screenplays of the year. It is really funny, but it's also an astute look at the limits of compassion and empathy and how sometimes we feel stuck in understanding another person fully, even if they are family. And that really is the brilliance of this film. We have these two characters, David and Benji. They grew up together and are very close. We mentioned they're cousins, but they do mention a few times that they're more like brothers.
Yeah.
They couldn't be more different from each other despite that, though, especially on an emotional level. On the surface, it's easy to distinguish between them as David has a family and is more socially awkward, whereas Benji is this free spirit with no family and someone who lights up every room he walks into. Personality-wise, they're oil and water, but underneath is a remarkable dichotomy as it relates to their emotional ethos. And it's here where the film gets really interesting. There's a scene where they talk about how David has always been outwardly emotional, implying that Benji is one to mask his pain. It's a funny little exchange, but it's insightful as to the duality between them, because what we see in this film as these events unfold is the complete antithesis. David is the one who cleverly conceals his pain, while Benji is quite volatile, sometimes lashing out at the entire group and wearing his emotion on his sleeve. And what that suggests in terms of grief and how it changes us, I think is very stirring, especially when you consider where they are. And you noted there, Brendan, the backdrop of this film and the parallels there between them.
Yeah.
And I guess to maybe be a little bit more specific, they are in Poland and they are visiting a place in history that was the home of obviously these unspeakable acts that incited a lot of cruelty and deep-rooted pain for a lot of families. Something that would experience the grief that these characters are experiencing as it relates to their grandmother. And I think that in turn heightens that dichotomy between David and Benji. Yeah. It is really, really insightful and powerful how Eisenberg is able to tap into that in his screenplay here, and how he's able to weave those dualities together, all while making, again, the film really funny. It is very funny. There's a lot of awkward tension to this film, to your point.
Yeah, there is.
It's never saccharine. It's never sentimental. That emotion comes with a lot of humanistic credence. And it's really fantastic how he weaves that into the writing here. I really do love these performances. Eisenberg and Culkin are both terrific. I am very much going to add my praise to Kieran Culkin. I agree with the consensus. He better start preparing for his Oscar speech right now. It is unequivocally one of the best performances of the year. Maybe my leading contender for supporting actor, although that is a category that I am increasingly loving more and more and more as the year goes on. That is going to be a really fantastic category to get into with the In Session Film Awards. Either way, Culkin gives one of my favorite performances of the year, and I do want to talk more about him as we go. I will say, I think Eisenberg should equally start writing his speech. Maybe not for acting, but his screenplay better goddamn be nominated. And maybe
Yeah.
even win, because his screenplay here is just as worthy of having the same kind of Oscar hype as Culkin's performance. It is truly remarkable. And the marriage of the writing, the marriage of these performances couldn't be any better.
Yeah, and
Phenomenal film.
And that's certainly, why we're probably seeing the campaigning done in that way. And I'm trying to be careful with how I say this because I think both performances here are really great, and I think both are worthy of some type of campaign, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did slightly prefer Jesse Eisenberg's performance here by a very slight margin, but that's not to undersell Kieran Culkin's performance, because I think the volatility in what Culkin is doing for Benji is a very tricky line to maneuver, because you could easily tap into it in a way that's overly volatile to the point that it loses the purpose of what's underneath and it becomes too loud and too aggressive. And I don't think he quite ever does that, which is what makes his performance so good. I just happen to respond more to the internalized and introspective sadness of David that's very cryptic and only becomes more open in a very pivotal scene halfway through the film that might be my favorite scene in the whole movie, if I'm being honest. And a lot of that, of course, is the dialogue and the story that David chooses to openly acknowledge and tell a group of strangers, essentially. I love the narrative choice there. But there is something about Eisenberg's performance that kind of broke me in the moment that I might give him the slight edge. But it's to the point that when it comes to how this movie could be represented in the awards conversation, and I guess I want to toss it back to you on this, because I know that Kieran Culkin's being campaigned for Best Supporting Actor. And I think I've seen certain award sites when they offer their predictions that Jesse Eisenberg could be considered for leading actor.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like
No.
I okay, thank you, because I feel
I invoke supporting performance in my opening thoughts because that is where he is being campaigned, and we typically tend to follow those performances and where they're campaigned. But logically speaking, these are co-leads.
I agree. Thank you. Okay, that's where I was going with that. And
no, you're right. You're definitely not wrong.
And that's where I was circulating back to the way I introed my thoughts there, coming off of your opening thoughts.
Yeah,
was how it makes sense that this is how it's being campaigned, because Kieran Culkin in the supporting acting category does give him more of a push and an edge, whereas Eisenberg is clearly going to be recognized for his screenplay. He's got the performance and the screenplay to work with. He's got multiple avenues here. So this is a nice way for the movie to kind of split the difference and find equal footing in different fields. So it makes sense to do that. I don't necessarily want to throw the term category fraud out there. I don't know if it's that heavy, because we've seen movies that do similar things with co-leads, but they kind of straddle the line a little bit. And this movie does straddle the line a little bit, but I really do think they're co-leads. I think they each serve the purpose of the movie in their own respective ways, that one really shouldn't be seen as more supporting than the other, if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree. I do think these are co-leads. However, I can somewhat understand, even if I don't agree with the decision, I can somewhat understand that move, even away from a political campaigning perspective. That's ultimately why they're doing this. But even if you look at the film on its own terms, there is a significant chunk of this movie where we do follow David more than we do Benji. When David is experiencing some of that inner turmoil that you're talking about, the camera follows him to the hotel, follows him wondering where Benji is. And that's the perspective we see a lot of in the middle of this film. And Benji does come and go for, a significant part of it. And from that angle, I can understand why people might look at this and say, okay, well, Culkin is more of a supporting performance here comparatively to Eisenberg.
Yeah, the narrative
However,
rhythm does seem to suggest that.
It does seem to suggest that. And I don't necessarily push back. However, at the end of the day, I still think these are co-leads, but I can at least understand why someone might arrive at that conclusion given the middle of this film.
No, I think that's fair.
Now, that said, if I'm an Oscar voter, and I'm not, but I'm an In-Session Film Awards voter, and this is
we
how
can do whatever
I'm
we
going
want
to vote. I would also vote for Culkin in acting and Eisenberg in writing. That's how I would vote. I do think Culkin is the best performance here. To me, it's not particularly close, but I want to be careful with how I phrase this similarly because I don't want to downplay Eisenberg's performance. I do think he is really good here. He is more introspective, and I feel like I'm having a little bit of an out-of-body experience myself right now because typically I am the complete reversal.
That's
here.
what you go for. Eisenberg's performance is what you go for normally.
Yes, 100% of the time, or 99% of the time.
I was going to say, a real pain has an argument against that.
Yeah, it really is. I always tend to prefer the introspective performance, but there is something about Culkin here that I do think is a little internalized, but I think it's really tricky performance because this is a character that is deeply grieving. He is disconnected from his cousin that is bubbling underneath the surface, and it does come out a little bit at the end of this film. He is a social butterfly. He likes to engage with people. He shows up at the airport 6 hours early just so he can people watch.
Yeah.
That is who he is. And I think the way Culkin taps into Benji's charm, why people are delighted to see him, how they are drawn to him, that's something that we see constantly throughout this film. But because he is grieving, because he feels disconnected with David, but he also wants to connect with him. He wants to be him, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
There's something about those complications here and how Culkin navigates them that does render some awkward tension at times, some awkward humor as he pushes back against other characters here. It is awkward, and I think intentionally so. He is that person in your family, and we all have them that we are deeply embarrassed by, but we also love them, and in some ways we want to be them. That is Benji in this film.
Yeah.
And I just like the way he navigates that endless charm and empathy with those outbursts of anger and frustration, I just find so remarkable. There's always something bubbling underneath, even though it is a more outwardly cathartic, or
it's a louder.
There's always something happening on the surface with Benji. There's always something there.
He's
but
always the loudest person in the room.
Always.
Yeah.
But there's always something bubbling underneath that drives that outburst, whether it be charm or volatility. Culkin taps into something underneath that unleashes that outward anxiety that we see in the character throughout. So, you know, Eisenberg, because of how he writes his own character, he is not allowed to be that overt with his performance until that one scene, and I do want to talk about that. But I think that's what I love about Culkin here. I think it's an extremely nuanced and extremely tricky performance that he manages to do so effortlessly. This is an authentic and vulnerable performance that he does in his freaking sleep. It is unreal how effortless he makes the performance. And I think that's why I was blown away by it, because I was at once charmed by him. I was embarrassed by him. I felt very awkward, but I was also heartbroken for him simultaneously. It's just incredible how he invokes all those nuances.
That is very difficult. You're right, to be able to bring that kind of nuance to a performance that is ultimately the showy performance of a movie, right? And he is giving the showy performance. You know, we've talked about how sometimes the Academy or any awards body, they tend to recognize and award either actors or editors or someone behind the camera for doing the most as opposed to the best, right?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
sometimes the most and the best can be simultaneous.
They can coexist. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of a hard thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
It
we don't
is,
often
yeah.
acknowledge how doing both is probably the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And you're right that Kieran Culkin is very effortlessly straddling that line. One scene, he is the most charming person of this tour group. The
Mhm.
next scene, he treats them like dirt, essentially.
Yeah.
To be very blunt about it, he is an
Yeah.
asshole.
Uh-huh.
And I can only imagine how, you know, some of the members of this tour, whether it be Jennifer Grey, who I didn't even know was in this movie, it was really interesting to see her, or
Mhm.
Will Sharp as James, who is running this tour. I felt so bad for him to have someone like Benji in your tour group and just not knowing what to expect.
Yeah.
But I think they handle that very well. And the choice to make this relationship cousins, like I talked about earlier, I do think
Mhm.
is really significant and really universal, because I feel like not only is it a family dynamic that we don't often see explored this heavily in movies as often, but I think it is arguably maybe the most volatile relationship people tend to have in their own families, because it's the
Mhm.
easiest connectivity you tend to lose over time for whatever reason that is. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just you can't keep in touch with everyone, just like you can't keep in touch with all of your friends. But your
Mhm.
immediate family, you're always going to have by your side. That's just kind of how it works. It's sometimes easy to lose touch with your own cousins, and I can speak from experience. You know, I try to
Yeah.
maintain my own connections with my own cousins, who I love very dearly, but it is more difficult. And
Yeah.
when you're with them after maybe a few months, maybe even a few years, you sometimes wonder, is there an awkward tension here now? Did I miss
Mhm.
something? And this movie is more direct about what is causing that awkward tension and what that history is.
Mhm.
But I think there is a real universality there, because I think this is a family dynamic that anyone maybe has experienced in some way, which I do
Mhm.
appreciate.
No, I appreciate that as well. And I do want to talk about the film's emotion and what it is doing on a thematic level. But to circle
Mhm.
back to Culkin's performance real quick, I think what I love about those ideas within his performance, and again, this circles back to the not just the performances, but the duality of these characters, how
Mhm.
subversive that ultimately becomes, given what we learn about them and then what
Yeah.
is translated as the film evolves, what the characters choose throughout this film. And I think what's really interesting, and again, to also tether it back to this idea of place, being in Poland on this Holocaust tour that they're on,
Mhm. Mhm.
ultimately arriving at their grandmother's house where she lived in Poland, where she grew up. That
Yeah.
is the ultimate goal for David and Benji here. I love how all of that coalesces within Culkin's performance, because you noted there a couple of times, and this all circles back to the complexities in his performance. That's ultimately what I'm trying to highlight,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
there are moments here where he is abrasive toward this group. You are wholly right on that.
Mhm.
However, I think there's an argument to be made that even within his volatility, could he have raised his concerns in a different way, in a more
Absolutely.
graceful way? Absolutely. Absolutely. He is abrasive, but I don't think he is wrong when he brings up
Mhm.
the train sequence, the
Yeah.
challenges that arise there. He brings up a discomfort that I think is kind of provocative. It is an
It
interesting
is a possible
idea
talking
that
point.
he
Yeah.
brings up. It's a great talking point that the group isn't willing to address. They don't want to
Mhm.
have that conversation. They want to live in the comfort of modern conveniences and the idea of they're just being on this tour. They are
Yeah.
distant from the pain and suffering. Whereas Benji, because of how he's grieving, because of how disconnected he is from David, but he wants to deeply connect with him simultaneously. So he has these emotions bubbling underneath that where he lashes out and he wants to wrestle with that irony.
Yeah.
And no one else wants to do so. I find that sequence absolutely fascinating. And then there's the moment at the gravesite where he pushes back against Jesse, who is spouting off these facts about history instead of letting the group simply remember these individuals as real people.
Yeah.
And again, the way he responds there, could he have done it in a little bit of a better way? Maybe. You can certainly sense David's apprehension there. He feels a little embarrassed there.
And James's reaction as the tour guide. You kind of want to give him a big hug, just given what he had to deal with. Yeah.
100%. And while you understand why they feel that the tension there, again, you like the argument of Benji there in that moment. He is right. He is right. Why do we want to hear a bunch of facts that, again, are distant from the moment? The facts on the page, they might be interesting, but it doesn't associate the realness of these people who suffered during that time. And he just wants to be in that moment and to recognize those people. And again, the way Culkin carries that abrasiveness, but also empathy and charm, like those two scenes, I think are incredible. Like he's challenging this group to go deeper in a way that they certainly wouldn't do otherwise. Yeah. And I think it says something about how we live our life perhaps through this tourist lens where we learn about these things. We might see them from a distance, or heck, we might even have a fun, playful photograph session with the Army soldiers who actually fought for those freedoms, right? That's a fun, quirky, little charming moment in this film.
Yeah.
But when
maybe
you dig beneath,
Benji should be the tour guide.
You dig beneath the veneer of those things, and Benji wants to truly wrestle with, why do we live as a tourist? Why can't we really wrestle with the real trauma, the real suffering, the real pain, if you will, that came about because of these awful things that happen. And the parallels of that to Benji in terms of the grief that he's experiencing and the disconnect he feels from someone he considers to be his brother, I find that so emotionally engrossing here. It is incredible. And as much as I love it on the page, and it is phenomenal on the page, do not get me wrong, it is one of the best screenplays of the year, but how Culkin brings that to life in Benji, it cannot be overstated how great that is. That is such a tricky performance that he, again, manages to do so impeccably seamless.
Well, I think the performance is also in keeping with what makes Jesse Eisenberg's script so great as well. We're talking about how this movie functions so well as a family drama, right? That is definitely part of its ethos. But there are things that at least the character of Benji chooses to do that are very much something Benji would do given his own personal trauma, his own grief that he is dealing with, but the parallels it creates to the experience at large. So I don't know if I would necessarily call A Real Pain a quote-unquote Holocaust movie, but it is very much a Jewish remembrance movie at the same time. It is very much about that, and the whole point of the movie is to draw those parallels between that religious history that maybe your family has a tie to, and then that how then can tie to your own grief and your own familial history at a more immediate and short-term level. So often that grief can seem so hidden and over time can actually be forgotten, just like the history at play here. And I think the movie, and especially with Culkin's performance, like you're talking about, does find that thematic through line between the internal and the external at large. And the movie, as a Jewish remembrance movie, I think is very respectful, especially given the places that it literally goes. I don't know if you were actually on the IMDb trivia page for this movie at all.
I was not, no.
Okay, and I guess for those listening, maybe you can correct us. I don't know if we should be putting so much stock in IMDb trivia. I don't know if it's like Wikipedia for IMDb and some people just throw facts in there. I think there are some valid points if they are in fact true. But apparently This is the first time a narrative feature has actually shown an actual concentration camp in a movie. That's one of the pieces of trivia here, which is a very respectful, kind of surprising thing. I did not know that. And I guess, to be a bit vague here, the home that they visit towards the end of the film actually were Jesse Eisenberg's real life ancestors who settled there at one point. There, it almost has like there's almost like a documentarian like mindset without becoming an actual documentary, if that makes sense. So I appreciate that sense of respect. I appreciate the way that the film is treating that without turning it into, like I said, a Holocaust movie, to be very blunt about those things. But there is also something about Culkin's performance in understanding that synergy between both of those things, how it extends just beyond what the two of them front and center are dealing with. And I think that's really great.
No, I completely agree. And that's what I love about, again, the writing of Benji, the performance, how it invokes an unexpected provocation in a film that is ultimately quite charming and funny throughout a lot of it. And here comes Benji going, no, I want to wrestle with this. I want to feel this, knowing that the people that did experience it have a trauma that you can hardly articulate. And being as close to his grandmother, who we learn is a survivor of the Holocaust, he certainly would understand that at least to some degree, but maybe not fully. And that is ultimately a lot of what this film is aiming for, that I do find fascinating. That's why they want to go on this tour and ultimately end up at their grandmother's house, because they want to understand her more, perhaps understand each other in a more fuller way as well. And thematically, how this film navigates that here, the limits of emotional understanding in each other, I do find the thematic underbelly of this film so fascinating in that regard. I do think there's a lot of truth to how sometimes we find ourselves stuck in realizing the depths of each other's pain. For as close as they may be, there is something about Benji that David cannot wrap his mind around. It is revealed to the audience at one point, and to your point earlier in this conversation, it is one of, if not the best scene in the film. And what we find out has David completely at a loss. For as much as he loves Benji and he shares his grief, there is a clear disconnect in how that grief has manifested for the both of them. And it's not just about Benji's secret, as I talked about earlier. It's how David is now concealing his pain for whatever reason. Benji is now wearing his emotion on his sleeves. Maybe their grief has changed them in some fundamental way, but that's what makes it real, pun intended, I guess. There's no filter, just a complicated array of pain that is difficult to fully dissect. And how this film goes about trying to understand the layers there, what causes that disconnect, what causes these views in perspective. And a lot of it might just be growing up, right? I mean, we don't learn too much about their childhood other than that David was emotional and Benji was more internalized.
It doesn't reveal much about that. In fact, I love that we don't even see any other members of the Kaplan family outside the two of them. And I love that.
That's it. They simply talk about their grandmother on occasion, and that's it. That's all we really learn about this family.
Yeah. I mean, we learn that we learn they're cousins because of their dads being brothers, but that's about the extent of it.
That's about it. And we learn that David is married. There's a time where he's on FaceTime with his wife and kid. And that is the visual. That's the storytelling here is David grew up, he got married, he had a kid, he lives a very different life than Benji, who lived in his parents' house in his mom's basement, I believe they joke about at one point. And because they've grown up to live these separate lives, there is a little bit of a disconnect, maybe a disappointment that they can't be as close as they were as kids. And going on this trip is a way for them to try to break through those barriers or try to understand and empathize with where each one of them are now in their lives, and to find some sort of empathy there. And I think that's what I love about the ending of this film, because it coalesces the broader Holocaust perspective, them trying to understand that in a more real way, and the parallel of them in their own grief trying to empathize with each other as well. And then it ends on this just incredibly touching note there on the airport that I think is just absolutely perfect.
Was
it's
that
just incredible?
Was that the exact same shot that opened up the movie, or did they recreate?
It certainly looked like it.
I mean,
it was very close if it wasn't. Yeah.
I mean, the most literal depiction of what we love the most in movies, JD, the circular arc.
The circular,
right?
yeah.
If there ever was one. But
Yeah.
the way that the title itself drops at the beginning and then at the end, the
Yeah.
placement of the title, A Real Pain, is on a different side of Culkin's head, as if
Yeah.
to suggest a shift of sorts that may or may not be there. Probably the best title drop for a movie of the year, if I'm being
It's
honest.
really good.
Given that
it's really
symbolic
good.
purpose, I do like how the film, just as a movie, and maybe this is also credit to Jesse Eisenberg, the director, is able to overcome and get away from the pitfalls of a movie like this. He doesn't fall into the trappings of cliche drama. And I think the way that the film is bookended is a great example of that. Going back to the restaurant scene where David finally opens up to this tour group about what is bothering him, what that real pain is. It's at a moment when Benji, having a little bit too much to drink and maybe verbalizing that he had too much to drink in a way that didn't involve words, I'll simply say, gets up from his table, leaves to go to the bathroom, and that's when David opens up. Man, in any other movie, Benji's right around the corner, listening in on that, and conflict ensues. I heard everything you
Yeah.
said. I didn't appreciate that.
Yeah, you're almost waiting for that shoe to drop.
And a different kind of shoe drops that may or may not reveal Benji was aware of what David was saying. It doesn't really answer that. There is ambiguity there, which is a really nice touch, I think.
I agree. No, I completely agree. And that somewhat circles back to what we were saying earlier, because so much of the perspective of that scene is from David. And there is that shoe that drops moment that you're talking about. It's ambiguous. I love how that plays out. He leaves the restaurant, and again, we follow him through the getting to the hotel, through the night, waking up, figuring out where Benji is, and that conversation we had earlier. But removing the awards context, I love the filmmaking there, because it is emphasizing how that moment has impacted David on such a deep level, right? Because what he reveals there is extremely vulnerable, and
it's
would be heartbreaking, would be really painful. It gives us insight into both characters in a new and different way. And again, circling it back to what I was saying just a moment ago in terms of the limits of emotional understanding. I mean, for as much as David loves Benji, and there is the surface tension of, man, he's really embarrassing sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, I apologize for his behavior. That's one thing. That one thing, but there's clearly something driving that even further that David obviously unleashes in that moment you're talking about, and how that comes about in the performance of Eisenberg there. I agree. That is one of, if not the best acting he's perhaps done in his entire career. That it was a phenomenal moment from Eisenberg, but I do love how he handles that moment as a director as well.
Yeah.
He avoids the trite pitfall. I completely agree. It's all about the emotion and letting that waft over these characters and the audience simultaneously, because it is a big reveal.
It is to a bunch of people that
David
he doesn't really know. So it may also be the most awkward scene of the film in some ways, which ironically doesn't come from Benji himself, at least directly. It's David initiating this open wound to really a bunch of strangers, which is something that Benji was more accustomed to doing in a very verbally different way, we'll say, right? He was more open and less embarrassed about those things. And here David is kind of doing the same thing, just at a different emotional level. I don't know if that was deliberate irony on Jesse Eisenberg's part as a writer and director. But if it was, then I think it makes the film even smarter than it perhaps seems on first go around. I think that's really clever.
Might be. It certainly seems like it was to me on a first go around, because I do think this is one of the smartest screenplays I've seen, and the filmmaking is really incisive in bringing out the cleverness there. And I found that absolutely engrossing here as well. I do love that irony, and again, how it tethers to that thematic underbelly of understanding each other and the barriers there that you sometimes have to break through, or you don't even know. I mean, because what we find out about Benji, I won't reveal, but again, David can't understand it. He doesn't. He has no idea how to even begin to wrestle with the choice that Benji made.
Yeah,
he
and
loves him.
And even by the end.
Even by the end, like he doesn't know. Similarly, Benji doesn't really understand the choices in the life that David is living.
Yeah,
David
there's not
used to
much of
be
a resolution here.
No.
Even the classic scene for a movie like this, which is, you know, the final coming together, that moment of catharsis where they lash out at each other and really learn to understand each other. We get that sort of here, which is that final rooftop scene before they fly back. But even that seems like it's cut short to simply acknowledge that, no, we're not getting here just yet, but we've reconnected. We've made our starting point, and that's all this movie is really interested in.
No, I completely agree. I mean, it's a scene where both of them simultaneously offer their, like, those limitations, right?
Yeah, they offer their perspective.
David fully tells him, I don't understand why you would make that choice. And on the other side of that coin, Benji flat out tells him, you've changed. Why have you changed? But there's no answers to either of those questions. You know, they just bring it up. They just talk about it.
Yeah. Not having the answers to things, that can be a real pain.
Yeah, it can be a real pain. I love this film. I absolutely adore it. You know, another thing too that I'll bring up here regarding the marriage of Eisenberg's writing and direction here, and this circles back to the other members of the group. So we have Marcia and Elaj. Is that how you say his name?
I think
Diane
so.
And Mark. What's interesting about these characters is that they are present. They're a part of this tour. They are characters that, you know, they interact with Benji and David, and they have, you know, each of them have their little moments here.
Sure.
But the film doesn't use them as pawns either. They're not there for Benji and for David to have some sort of, like, I don't know, like kind of sentimental moment.
Right.
Like that's just not what they're there for. They're literally there just to be a part of the journey with David and Benji.
Yeah.
And to your point earlier about how, you know, there's other versions of this movie where at the restaurant, you know, Benji comes in and he overhears all of that. Like there's other versions of this movie where these other characters that are part of the group have bigger, more saccharine moments here that lead to a more like overly melodramatic movie.
This is not to
this is not what this is.
This is not to undersell the inclusion of these other characters in this tour group, but the film and Jesse Eisenberg does sort of utilize them as kind of just pieces of a puzzle in a way. I think of them as like, in order for this movie to really work, think of it as like a pinball game. You sometimes have to bounce that ball between various things in order to make it to the actual destination you want it to go to, right? And sometimes you need settings or even characters to basically serve as those barriers for your pinball to actually make it to its journey, right? And that's not to undersell their characterization. They serve that purpose. Without them, the film just has no way of exploring these ideas without it just seeming contrived and overly written.
Exactly.
You need those things, and this is where form becomes very important. And Jesse Eisenberg clearly understands the filmmaking form and the narrative form to actually tell a story
Yep.
efficiently. So
I agree.
I agree.
No, yeah, the writing and direction, the performances here, all assiduous, all working of a piece in uniform. It's fantastic. Yeah, I love this
Good
movie
movie.
a lot.
Good
Really
movie.
good stuff. Yeah. Any other final thoughts? I think we've covered.
I think
a
we
lot
have.
here.
I do want to watch this one again. I will say I don't. This is where the end of the year gets really difficult, especially when we're trying to do our end of year ranking and some of our awards stuff. I think doing our awards categories on our award show is actually a lot easier than compiling our top 10 of the year. I feel like that's a lot easier
Okay.
because you can veer away from just your top 10 and recognize that, oh, a movie that I have at maybe, I don't know, 22 or something like that actually has one of the best scripts of the year. So like you can actually like look at movies in different ways regardless of how they rank. But man, we're getting to a point where I just find myself giving the 4 out of 5 star rating to a lot of movies, and it's just getting really challenging to rank some
Yeah.
of these really good movies. I don't
Yeah.
know if I have a real pain in my top 10 at this point, but it's definitely close, and it could raise. Maybe something else might raise over. I don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna have to really sit with these for a while.
No, I completely agree. I mean, it's always challenging this time of year, and you're right. There are certain elements of this film that will be easy when it comes to the awards part.
Right.
Culkin will be in for supporting actor if we do acknowledge the Oscars, if we
Yeah.
maintain the same thing there. He's going to make my 5. Eisenberg screenplay will make my 5 for screenplay. Does the film crack quote unquote best picture? Does it get into my top 10? I don't know. That's really difficult. I do agree.
I know.
Now I haven't
Yeah.
really done that exercise, but I'm looking at the 10 that I have here currently. What this film could replace, I don't know. Like I just I don't know, because the 10 that I have currently are really good. Like if the year ended and these are the 10 that I end up with,
You'd be
I'll
happy with it
perfectly
at
happy.
least. Yeah, it might not be the best top
perfectly
10
happy.
at the end of a certain year when compared to other years, maybe. I mean, there's still more to go, but it'd be a 10 that you'd be happy with. And I kind of
10,
feel the
yeah.
same way about mine. Like I wouldn't hate this top 10 if we had to end the year right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and we still have to discuss The Brutalist. We haven't seen Wicked. We haven't seen Gladiator yet. Like there's still some heavy hitters that we do need to get into.
There are a lot of heavy hitters we haven't seen yet. Our schedule is packed for the rest of the
It's
year.
packed.
I don't know how we're going to do it.
I don't know either. it's gonna get crazy. These last few months, but yeah, like I've heard great things about The Seed of the Sacred Fig, for example. Hard Truce is in there. Baby Girl, Nosferatu. I mean, we can't forget that. Nosferatu might come in here and just completely wreck my top 10.
I mean, it's a Robert Eggers film. Every film he's made thus far has cracked my top 10.
Yeah.
So I think by default, Nosferatu is the best movie of the year.
Which is why I struggle to really do these lists. And it's funny because I see people all the time tweeting, here's my top 10 or here's my top 20 of the year so far. I'm like, why are you guys going out of your way to make these lists now? There's 2 months still to go, and Nosferatu could completely wreck your list.
It's garnering attention. I understand why some people would try to do that.
I'm being facetious here.
Yeah, because I actually do keep a running list that I keep as a private list on Letterboxd. It's only for me, but I mostly do that because it helps me remember the movies that I'm seeing, so I don't forget anything. It's just
that's
for my own
understandable.
sanity.
Yeah.
But I am not going to publish that at all anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I noted that I'm looking at my list now. I have a vague list, but this is far from being set in stone. Like this is vague. I have not really wrestled with this since we did our top 5 at the midway point. That's the only time that I've truly wrestled with this. Every time I see a film, I just kind of vaguely insert it into where I think it might be, and that's it. I leave it there. I don't touch it again.
Yeah.
Because, something comes along and it's like, okay, well, now I got to think about this. And then there's the next movie that Like I can't just be constantly doing this every single week,
I don't
especially
know.
this time of year.
It is kind of fun that, at one point I'll mess with my current top 10 as I think it sits, and then 5 minutes later I'll change it, then 5 minutes later I'll change it, 5 minutes later I'll change it. I do have a full-time job, by the way, and sometimes I find myself not doing my job.
Well, let me tell you, that'll end the day you start having children.
Oh, well, I know.
That's
sure
why I can't. Like, I don't have the energy or the time to be doing this all the time.
I'm sure my emotional bandwidth will change, that I just respond to movies completely differently, that it wouldn't even matter anymore. I'll just have a very different framework.
Well, I mean, even aside from that, like, I just don't have the time or the energy to be wrestling with this list all the time. I just don't have it in me.
There is something to be said about someone that compiles a list for an end of year exercise like that, and they just wait to the last minute to do it, to say, okay, this is how I'm feeling right now, and it's just a reflection of what I'm feeling right now. Yeah, there is something to be said about that.
Like, I'm closer to that than I am, let's constantly change this all the time. I just can't, because we see a lot of new films, from week to week, obviously. And this time of year, it's not just the new films that are coming out, the awards film, but there's also a lot of catch up, right? I mean, we had 2 main show episodes back to back that were just catch up episodes, because we're catching up.
There will be more. There will be more.
Ghost Lights of the world and Mild Asses of the world, so like, and those films are playing a part of this as well. So there's a lot of catch up. There's all the new stuff. I like people that are able to just constantly wrestle with the list like that. I envy your energy.
They're at a point where they're just doing it subconsciously. It's like they dream about their list. They dream about their lists.
Yeah. Like, the only time I'd maybe be able to do that is in the shower in the morning, but I am not awake at 6:30 a.m. So, like, doing it at that time is pointless.
Yeah, it is for me, though. It is nice to overthink this list in the months leading up to our award show, and then by the time we get close to our award show, I just stop overthinking it. Yeah. It's then I can just get it out of my system, and then I feel, okay, now I know what I'm doing here.
Yeah, no, I will actively have to set a time, set aside time. That's the only way I get this done. I will have to.
That's what adults do.
Remove myself from my family.
We're governed by the clock.
Job. Like, I need to be by myself for 2 hours to finalize this list.
What was that line that Sylvester Stallone had in Creed? Time takes everyone out. It's undefeated. Boy, is that one of the truest things I've ever heard in a movie.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Anyway, that was a rabbit hole I did not intend to get us into. A real pain.
Well, I mean, doing these lists, it's a real pain sometimes.
It's a real pain. Go check out this movie. It is really, really good. I quite love it. Certainly a contender for my top 10. We'll see where it lands, but it is at the very least a major, major contender. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Letterboxd. You can email us incessionfilm@gmail.com. Okay. We have 2 other reviews out this week as well. Emilia Perez will already be out by the time this episode goes live, so you can be on the lookout for that. And then we will also have a new review for Memoir of a Snail. Yeah. The animated movie. So be on the lookout for that. Episode 611 is available as well. We talk about musicals, our favorite musicals of the 21st century so far. We talk about Cooper Hoffman, had a great little segment there. We talk the box office.
They're giving out the ads for free.
It's so good. Yeah. I do love that.
I think that's a new t-shirt idea, JD.
Yeah. I do love that the Twitter account, Cooper Hoffman Updates, tweeted at us, and they were one of the ringleaders in terms of making all that stuff go viral over the weekend.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening.
That's sweet. That's sweet.
Absolutely love that. So very, very busy week. We're also going to have a new Chasing Gold and a new Women in Session this week as well. So with all that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Kieran Culkin, Oscar.
Real good.